Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm just gonna go around. I have to.
Just ask 5 minutes village to seats. We anticipate a busy hearing today. For the record, my name is John Fernandez, and I'm the House Chair, co-chair of the Judiciary Committee. To my right is Senator Brownsberger, who is the Senate co-chair of the committee. We have a number of legislators here with us today who serve on the committee. On my far left, I believe Senator Keenan, Representative Roy, Representative Tucker, Representative Bobby, Representative Gay, Representative who's on the staff of the committee, House Vice Chair, Representative Cronin, Keith McFarland of the committee staff, and the committee staff, Representative Felix, Representative Lyons, and we have a number of bills on today. I know that quite a few people are here for the public accommodation, so-called bills that are on. There are a number of other bills as well that people want to be heard on, and there may be fewer people on some of those bills. So what we're going to do is take some testimony on that public accommodation bill. We're going to switch to some testimony on some other bills, and we'll be coming back and mixing it in as best we can, asking people for as much patience as is possible. These hearings can't run very long. We do ask, since the hearing is one step in the process of review of legislation, it's an important step, but it's not the only one. If you have written testimony, please, we ask that you not read lengthy written testimony. You can submit that to the staff, and I assure you that every member of the committee will get it and read it. We ask that you more to the point, if you're coming up to tell a personal story, simply tell us that personal story and submit the other testimony in writing. And if you feel as though there's more you want to say post-hearing, please feel free to submit something in writing. We do ask, because of the number of people that are here, that you limit your testimony to just a few minutes. We try and ask you to hold it to 3 minutes. We do have a clock on that. We will have to remind people it is a courtesy that we are asking you to extend more to each other than us. We're prepared to stay here as long as it takes so that every single person who wants to be heard is heard. But the courtesy is really to each other that we ask you to extend, and then we ask you to try and hold the testimony for that period of time. So thank you very much. We will begin. We have a panel, the Attorney General, Warren Ely, Suffolk County District Attorney Dan Connolly, and Commissioner Evans of Boston Police. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Brownsberger, Chairman Fernandez, and the entire committee for the opportunity to be heard. I'm here today to provide support for legislation to protect transgender people in places of public accommodation. Delighted to be joined by Suffolk County District Attorney Dan Connolly, who made a special effort to lead another engagement to be here with us, and also Boston Police Commissioner Bill Evans. 4 years ago, you all took an important step in making sure that there was a law in place to protect transgender people from being discriminated against on the job, in school, when they go to rent an apartment, when they go to get a loan. But right now in Massachusetts, those very same people, when they visit our stores, our parks, our medical offices, or even a public building such as this, they have to do so with the fear that if they encounter discrimination, if they're turned away or harassed or denied service, the law isn't going to be there to protect them. To me, it does not make sense that a restaurant can refuse right now, can't refuse to hire a transgender person, but could refuse that same person's service when they come through the door to order a meal. It just doesn't make sense. Nor does it make sense to me that a school cannot discriminate against a transgender student, but yet that same student could be picked off of a public bus on the way to school, and they wouldn't have protection under the law. I want to be brief, and I want to speak directly to the committee about three particular concerns. First, is there a problem? It has been an evolving narrative lately that this really isn't a problem. This discrimination isn't happening. I think you only need to look behind me to understand that this discrimination is real. It is happening to people in our state. This is a problem. Transgender people regularly face discrimination in places of public accommodation. Last year, GLAD, which is the Legal Advocacy Organization, fielded 42 complaints of public accommodation discrimination from transgender people. Our office, just since January, when I took office, we've received 7 complaints alone from transgender individuals about discrimination. And to my mind, it's actually remarkable because the law currently doesn't protect them. And it's hard for people to be expected to call and complain to an office like the Attorney General, given that the law is such that that kind of legal protection is not clear. But we know from our work that the issue is real, from spending time listening to and talking to people and their families. Individuals seeking health care at an emergency room who is subjected to public ridicule by the admitting staff, a person refused service by a cashier at a grocery store when they were going through the line, an individual barred from entering a restaurant with her friends. I don't believe that anyone in Massachusetts should be treated this way. The second question I want to address is this. There's been concern raised that amending the law to provide protection against discrimination in places of public accommodation is somehow going to give protection to those individuals who might try to enter a restroom or a locker room for improper reasons. The answer to that is no. The extent people enter places of public accommodation, restrooms or other places, and engage in criminal conduct, they will be held accountable under the law. The bill allows people to use those facilities, including bathrooms and locker rooms, that correspond to their actual identity. But it does not mean, folks, that men are allowed to dress up like women so they can walk into a women's room. My office isn't aware of a single instance in Massachusetts or anywhere else in the country where that has actually occurred, where an individual actually tried to use the guise of gender identity protections as a defense to criminal conduct. And I say that to you, having carefully surveyed the entire field. I'm submitting letters from other states that have had these laws on their books, these protections in place for years, and from all police chiefs in all of the 13 Massachusetts cities and towns that have had their own transgender protections. These letters make clear, as a matter of public safety, that extending protections to transgender people in places of public accommodation does not present a public safety issue, nor have such protections been used as an excuse to engage in unlawful conduct. It's important to me that the committee understand that and be aware of the evidence, not just here, but across the country on that front. And in fact, the police chief's letters confirm across the board, as does the wonderful letter submitted in support of the bill by the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association and the Massachusetts major city chiefs, is that these ordinances improve and protect public safety. Because what we do see, and what is real, is that transgender people are targeted for crimes, are harassed, and are attacked in restrooms, locker rooms, and in other places of public accommodation. They, in fact, are more likely to be the victims of violent crime. The third question that I've heard is this, and again, I want to be very clear. Does this law, would this law impose or create new burdens for businesses? The answer to that is flatly no. Businesses have already done so much in this space, changing policies to update, for example, employment anti-discrimination policies to provide protections for transgender employees. But to be clear, this bill will not require businesses to build new facilities, alter their signage, alter their physical plans in any way, shape, or form. They don't need to build new bathrooms. I'm speaking from experience. Our office recently adopted a transgender non-discrimination policy. It was straightforward to put in place, and we've made no alterations to our office or our facilities. In fact, many companies recognize that extending these protections is good for business, creating an open, inclusive, and welcoming environment is critical for attracting and retaining employees, but also customers. That's why you see resounding support from over 150 businesses here in Massachusetts. Businesses like Google and Harvard Pilgrim and Blue Cross Blue Shield and EMC and Eastern Bank, Legal Seafood, trade associations, organizations like the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce all support this bill. You're going to hear from these businesses later today. Look, if we don't grant these protections to transgender people, I believe that we are sending a message that we as a state don't fully accept them, that we don't welcome them. That's the wrong message to send. It's time for us to join 17 other states across this country and 225 cities and towns across the United States, including 13 here in Massachusetts, that already have this law in place. So that every person who walks down the block to the grocery store, every child who takes the bus to school, will be protected from discrimination. I ask you to give these bills a favorable recommendation. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Before the next speaker, I just want to acknowledge that Senator Ross is and Representative Harrington behind me.
Chairman Hernandez, Chairman Brownsberger, all members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be before you again. I'm testifying today in support of House Bill 1577, Senate Bill 735, for all of the reasons just previously stated by my colleague, Attorney General Mark Healy. Public accommodation, without discrimination, with the full protection of the law, is a matter of basic human dignity and respect. I've been advocating for fair and equal treatment of people, regardless of their sexual orientation, throughout my public career. And over the years, every time we came to a new step we needed to take to make our Commonwealth more just, more tolerant, and more fair, we have been met with dire convictions. Each time we overcame those arguments with reason and by appealing to people's inherent sense of decency and fairness. And every time we did so as a Commonwealth, as a society, and as citizens, we emerged better. The arguments that we have heard for several years now in opposition to these bills are based on unfounded claims. That is not a political statement, but a fact I report to you as District Attorney of Suffolk County. I represent the most diverse population in Massachusetts and all of New England. In my 14 years as District Attorney, there has not been a single case, not one, of a person who pretended to adopt another gender identity in order to commit a crime. If anyone had done so, they would have been prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And rest assured that after this bill is passed, and I hope it will be, people will still not be allowed to use gender identity claims to break the law. So there is no factual basis for the claim that people have or will use gender identity as a defense to shield or minimize illegal behavior. There is, however, a wealth of evidence demonstrating that transgender citizens are routinely subjected to discrimination and even violence for who they are. The level of violence and hatred is often severe, resulting in beatings and even death. Our laws need to reflect that discrimination for any reason, including gender identity, is wrong, and start honoring the differences that make our community stronger. It is the duty of government to protect all citizens, but government has a special obligation to protect and support marginalized people. Transgender individuals are subject to hate, fear, ridicule, violence, and discrimination. Rita Hester was neither the first nor the last transgender individual to suffer this kind of hate. But her murder in her home in Boston in 1998, which remains unsolved, was one of the unconscionable acts that inspired the community to declare enough. Her death began the Transgender Day of Remembrance, celebrated each year on November 20th. But it's not enough to light candles and remember and hope. We need to act and passage of this bill into a law if the action is needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Rossberg, Chairman Fernandez, and members of the committee. I joined Attorney General Maura Haley and District Attorney Dean Conley today to testify on behalf of Mayor Martin J. Walsh in support of House Bill 1577 and Senate 735, reaffirm the rights of transgender individuals in public accommodation free of discrimination. I'm here because I believe that these bills will improve public safety in Massachusetts. In Boston, we have had a local ordinance in place since 2002 to protect transgender individuals in public accommodation. Implementation of this ordinance has gone smoothly, and these protections have made a difference. I have heard some people say that these bills will allow men to dress as women, go into bathrooms and locker rooms and commit crime. That has not been our experience in Boston, and I have not heard of it occurring anywhere else. Unfortunately, transgender individuals are frequently the victims of criminal conduct. If you pass these bills, it will send a strong message about the inclusion and tolerance that helps us in law enforcement do our job. The more we can do to help vulnerable groups like transgender people feel protected by the law, the more willing they are to come forward and help the police, help the district attorney, and help the attorney general all do our job. It is 2015. No individual should be discriminated against in restaurants, hospitals, hotels, or any other space open to the public based on their gender identity. It is most certainly should not be legal to do so. As a legislator, you have the opportunity to protect valued members of our community. I encourage you to pass these non-discriminatory bills. As the capital city, Boston has proven that these meaningful protections can be extended to cover gender identity without incident. I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, are there any questions from members of the committee? Representative Lyons?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to distinguished group for testifying today. I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to focus in on. And just as a general practice, if there is a discrimination claim made in Massachusetts, is there a procedure that we follow? Do we file a complaint, go to court? What procedure do we follow when there is someone who is discriminated against in any way?
Well, take a few forms. We have a Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, where people can file discrimination claims, and then there's an initial assessment, and if there's a probable cause finding, that means there's an initial low-level threshold and it can go on. What's important, though, in your question and pointing out is that today, I want to be perfectly clear, there is no explicit protection under the law to protect people in transgender people in places of public accommodation. There is no law that specifically provides that protection, nor has there been a single finding or court case that would otherwise establish that. That's another reason why this law is needed.
So my question was, if there is any kind of a discrimination claim, not necessarily as it relates to transgender, what is the process? Does it go right to a criminal complaint? Does it go to a civil complaint? Does it go to the Mass Commission of Discrimination? In other words, if someone is discriminated against, can they just go file a complaint at a district court or a superior court, or is there a process that the law is established that you have to follow?
Well, for employment claims, they have to file, for example, at the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. Sometimes they're otherwise allowed to file directly in superior court. These are civil discrimination claims. And so when you're talking about for race, for disability, for ethnicity, for religion, for gender, all categories where we say, you know what, treat people as they are and for what they do, don't discriminate based on a characteristic or trait. We also make sure that those protections are in place in places like restaurants and movie theaters, public buildings, places of public accommodation. The only category of persons that don't actually have that same protection are transgender people. And that's what we're looking to make right here with this law. Bring them in line with all the other groups and characteristics that form the basis for our anti-discrimination law.
So the answer is that if someone has a discrimination claim, the first place they go would be the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. I think that would be, if someone was discriminated against and they came to my office, what can we do? I would direct them to MCAD. I think that's where I would go.
You know, Representative, you're right, that would be probably the appropriate place to direct them. I will say they turn up at our office, they turn up at other offices, they turn up at private firms. There are places,
But
the
your office,
federal agencies as well.
but your office can't make a determination. You have to refer it to someplace. And right now, what the law says is you have to go to the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. And they look at, for example, according to their report, in 2013, there were 3,100 or so complaints. In 2014, there was a certain number of complaints. But I want to draw the attention to the public accommodation side of what Mass Commission Against Discrimination has done. There are cases that they have adjudicated based on people being discriminated against at hospitals and people that are being discriminated against in restaurants. And one of their findings in one of their reports, the hearing officer,
Could you speak louder, please?
sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Massachusetts, according to a report filed by Jamie Williamson, the investigative commissioner, on April 28 of 2013, Massachusetts precedent holds that a place of public accommodation has an obligation to treat each member of the public equally, except for good cause. Now, I'm not an attorney, but precedent would seem to suggest to me that there is precedent out there to treat people equally except for good cause. Now, what this case stems from is something that took place in 2009. There was a lawsuit filed or a discrimination claim filed regarding an individual that was a transgender female who went into a hospital and wanted to get, as he was transitioning from a female to a male, wanted to get artificially inseminated in a hospital. And the hospital determined that they were unable to do that. There was ultimately, the individual ultimately left the hospital, went someplace else, was artificially inseminated, and ultimately gave birth. And in the arguments that they make in this report, it specifically says, complainant met all standards in regard to his physical and hormonal level required by all patients seeking fertility. There was a standard set during this particular case. So the argument that people who are transgender don't have any rights seems to fly in the face of the fact that the Mass Commission of Discrimination, in at least 2 instances in the last 2 years, have found probable cause. Am I reading this wrong?
Well, yes.
That's what everybody always tells me.
No, but everybody, it's not your fault. Let me tell you what was going on there. The MCAD was making a preliminary finding, a probable cause, saying there's enough alleged here such that this can go forward. It wasn't an actual finding, it wasn't an actual ruling, it has no validity in terms of precedent. In fact, what we do know is that no business has ever been held liable here for discrimination against a transgender person in a place of public accommodation. On the federal level, where some of this is played out, we have court cases saying that right now, under the law, there is no protection for transgender people in places of public accommodation based either on a sex or gender-based theory. And I think what you see is there were 2 preliminary probable cause findings at MCAD. That's 2 that have been tested at all. And I think what that speaks to is, you're going to hear later today from so many folks who have been the victims of discrimination, yet there hasn't been a place for them to take those claims because there isn't a protection under the law. And that's what this is about.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with you because the case that I cited regarding the transgender female who was transitioning to a male was asking to be artificially inseminated. And the Mass Commission of Discrimination realizes that that was a hospital. They realize that that's a public accommodation. So the argument that I've heard from most folks on that are promoting the fact that we need this legislation is that there isn't protection. You also have them saying that there is protection within the Massachusetts laws citing precedent. Now, I'm not an attorney, but we certainly could go back and find out. But if Mass Commission Against Discrimination, the agency who is vested with the responsibility to determine whether or not something is or isn't covered by the law, it would seem to me almost a no-brainer that when someone comes in and says, we're filing this because it happened at a hospital, that they would say, no, we can't take this case because they're not protected. That isn't what they did. They went forward in 2 instances. The other instance, by the way, was a restaurant. And I can get into the details, but I don't. But I don't want to hold up everyone. I do want to have one other area of the bill that I want to talk about, and that's the rights of privacy. The rights of privacy. And I believe that when we put this legislation forward in 2011, we specifically carved out a specific part of the bill. The bill that we carved out was bathrooms, locker rooms, and sex segregated facilities. Now, the question that I have is, there are rights in conflict. So when we add rights or take away rights, it impacts one person or another. And I'm going to focus specifically at the schools and at the locker rooms. According to the regulations that were put in place after the law was passed, the Commissioner of Education has put in place that an individual can wake up today, 15, 16-year-old boy, and say that I am a female. No standard, no discussion, on their own can say that, and they can go into any facility, whether it be a locker room for girls or a bathroom for girls, and use those facilities. The question that I asked the Commissioner 3 years ago, and I'm asking you folks today, does the little girl or little boy who is in that bathroom, do their expectation of privacy rights matter? And are the concerns of parents to make sure that their children have privacy rights, does that matter? Because I'm not suggesting, as others have, that people dress up and go commit crimes. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I'm suggesting that they do matter. That the privacy rights of our children matter. And if a young person comes out of the restroom, that we ought to at least think about that. And when I asked Mr. Chester the question, did you ever think about whether that little girl or boy is traumatized for no other reason than their expectation of privacy says I can go into my restroom and understand that I'm in a girl's bathroom or a boy's bathroom? And the answer to the question was no. Was no. The only people's rights we're thinking about here are the rights of the transgender folks. And I appreciate that. But what about those rights? What about those parents that are concerned? What do we say to them?
Well, let me take both of those. On the first point about the MCD, I want to be real clear, folks. This was the equivalent of something being sent to study. This was not a finding. This was not a ruling. This was not a determination. In fact, in both of those cases, they actually settled. MCD is not a court. It's not a court of laws. And in fact,
But you would agree that the first line that people have to go to, and you
for certain things, not for places of public accommodation. But my point is simply this: I want to be clear that there is no legal precedent, there is no case, there is no court authority that any transgender person who's been alleged to have been aggrieved by discrimination in a place of accommodation, there is no place for them to turn. Those were preliminary findings in just 2 cases that had no force of law, and in fact, both of those matters were settled out of court, so we'll never know how that plays out. With respect to the second point, look, I appreciate where you're coming from on this. I also will tell you and share that we have been using bathrooms and facilities with transgender people for a long time. We may not even know. I think all of us, when we go into locker rooms, and we both had this experience, representative in locker rooms, and bathrooms, of course there is an element, an expectation of privacy, but they're never entirely private places. We know that. And I think themselves with a certain decorum and modesty and the like. And my point to all of you is, don't expect anything less from transgender people, right? They're no different. Don't expect anything less. When it comes to children, I did have experience working directly with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed when I was chief of the Civil Rights Division on implementation of the earlier legislation. I think it went extremely well and extremely smoothly. And I am reminded of the fact that over just across the way at Boston City Hospital, at Boston Children's Hospital, there are 300 young people, children there, who are receiving treatment for gender identity issues. And I think that's important. We think about those children, we think about their health, we think about their security, we think about the world that they want to grow into. We of course need to respect the dignity of all people, and we want people to do that. But don't think that by closing this loophole here, there is a gap here. As I say, it's just not right to me that public accommodation protections exist for all these other categories, but not for transgender people and gender identity. We think about how important it is that we close this gap and move forward. I believe that you've heard from my colleagues in public safety. We have really vetted this. It is why I submitted the testimony from 13 police chiefs, from the Mass Major City chiefs, from jurisdictions, states around this country on the specific issue of public safety. And there just has not been any evidence or issue in that regard. And as I say, I think we can look to our own state and how easily and successfully the regulations that DESI drafted have been implemented in schools across the state to see that this hasn't been a problem, nor would it be a problem when it comes to places of public accommodation.
Just one final question, Mr. Chairman. So there's one other aspect of the legislation that I want to get your input on, and the regulations that was submitted by Commissioner Chester talks about who makes the decision, and parental involvement, I think, is very, very important in our young people's lives. We, at the legislative level now, are looking at eliminating folks, young kids, from going into tanning salons. You know, young people can't smoke cigarettes until they're 18. The 18 age limit seems to be an important element of decision making. Yet in this case, transgender and gender non-conforming students, this is right from the regulations, may decide to discuss and express their gender openly and may decide when and whom and how much to share private. A student who is 14 years or older who has entered the 9th grade may consent to disclose of information from his or her record. And there's other areas of this bill where it says that the individual, once they reach 14, and I think even younger, don't need any discussion with their parents. Is that what we should be doing, kind of pulling their parents away from this particular child at that age? I'm just a little unclear as to why that's such a focus.
Well, I think that today's legislation is about the places of public accommodations. Education has been dealt with in the earlier form. What I do know is out there is some level of discomfort. I'll be perfectly candid with you. But look, folks, just remember, we made some changes back a while ago, and after segregation, people were, in efforts at ending segregation, people were uncomfortable sharing pools and sharing drinking fountains. Discomfort is not a reason to perpetuate discrimination, not in the state.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, General Attorney Commissioner, thank you very much.
invited to come here if they agree not to talk.
Boy, you have power. Thank you very much for being on here.
We are obviously here to support House Bill 1577 and Senate Bill 735, an act relative to gender identity and non-discrimination. As you know, and most of you were there in 2011, though all of you were not, the Massachusetts legislature passed a transgender civil rights bill. At that time, we had and heard a considerable amount of discussion about public accommodation and civil rights for transgender people, and we decided, the sponsors of that bill decided that it would be best if that discussion continued. But we did not want to pause any longer, delay any longer in the passage of all the other guarantees for the group of transgender people in our state, and
You can sit in front of my
and
camera,
proceeded
if you want to.
to pass the law that
This
is
is where
now
the
on the
press
floor.
come. Are you
It is
press?
important also to understand that what this legislation that we have before us is going to do is to simply place that added
Keep it up, I'm going to make a
that
scene.
all other protected groups in this state who have civil rights coverage have the right to go to any public accommodation in the state, add that to the legislation, that the law that already exists. That is the question that is before us. We are not changing the definition of transgender. That definition already exists in the law, and I call on all of you to read that occasionally before you comment on who is transgender and who is not. But it is clear in that law, that you cannot wake up one day and say I'm transgender and have all these rights. That's not the way it works. And so please, we are talking about people who have seriously understood that their understanding of their own gender does not correspond with their physical birth identity or what they were called when they were born. And that is a very important piece for us. Let me just say that you've had lots of references to civil rights. Massachusetts is the second state in the union that adopted anti-discrimination legislation. And we did that in the 1940s, right after World War II. The group of people who were covered were people who were being discriminated because of their race, their color, their national origin, or their religion. We have added over the years several protected categories since then. And we might add protected categories in the future, because what we do in this state is pay attention to our neighbors. And when we find that groups of our neighbors are being treated unfairly simply because of some characteristics that they share with other people, we say, no. We believe that people should be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, and not that is what we are asking you to do, follow in that tradition of this great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And finally, let me say that if you look at one of the ways that you identify discrimination, it is in the kinds of things that people say might happen if those people get to be someplace where they are not now. Many of you are old enough to remember in this country when people said that they did not think that black people should white people who were in those restaurants. And what was our reply? Nonsense, that will not fly. We believe that everyone should be able to share in that opportunity of that public accommodation. That same thing is happening now. Keep an eye out and an ear out when you hear it. Let us capture it.
Would you give a microphone?
Yes.
You don't have the voice to do it.
No, I do not.
None of us do.
But as our Attorney General pointed out, 17 states, the District of Columbia, extend equal protection of their laws to sexual minorities. They ban discrimination against lesbians, gay, bisexual, and transgender people throughout the public realm. But Massachusetts extends this blanket protection to lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, but not to transgender people. We treat them differently. Article 11 legislation confers patches of protection for transgender people, some referred by surrogates. These patches provide important protections in various areas of hate crime, K-12 education, housing, credit, and employment, but they are disconnected. What's missing is the rest of our social status, what you see on the other diagram, there's a whole world of public accommodation. Travel between the protected areas of home, work, and school, safe recourse to public places, access to the world of commerce, not just as an employee, but as a customer. Patches do not sufficiently protect transgender people inside this room or outside this room. Some of whom are the friends and family of people who work or have worked in this building. The time has come to assure transgender people and their families the kind of blanket coverage against discrimination that they need and reasonably expect. I ask the committee to report this still big. Thank you.
Good afternoon, chairs of the committee. I joined my responses to this legislation here to testify about an issue that I believe we have both a moral and professional obligation to address. Public accommodations, as we come from our people, are fundamental to equal rights in our society. They are the foundation upon which our everyday lives take place. They are where we go to eat when we're hungry, where we go to help when we're sick, where we spend our hard money when we shop, play, and travel. Public accommodations are so integral to how we function in the world that many of us don't even have to think about their significance. But for the transgender community, public accommodations are the last holdout for rights denied, and unfortunately, the last holdout that is woven into their day-to-day lives. And it is a reminder of just how precious and just how vulnerable our civil rights are. There are real consequences to moving transgender behavior out of public accommodations protection. For one thing, our recognition of gender identity as a protected status in all other realms except public accommodations actually first created a bizarre inconsistency for many transgender workers and their employers' life. And you've heard reference to the example of an establishment that not refused to hire transgender as an employee, or they denied them service for a meal later that day. active in the health and the safety of transgender individuals and their families. Just last year, the Family Institute here in Massachusetts conducted a survey of transgender residents in the Commonwealth and found that nearly two-thirds reported having been discriminated against in public accommodation within the last year alone. In a national survey, we saw like results. Just over half of national respondents reported being verbally harassed in public accommodation, and up to 6% reported being physically assaulted during these incidents, a reason that makes me especially glad to see so much support from our law enforcement community here today. Far from being threats to public safety, as some detractors will argue, it is the transgender community that most frequently experiences safety and wellness as a direct result of the discrimination that our current law legitimizes. Supporters of the status quo, and I can't say the following strongly enough, supporters of the status quo raise the red herring of endangering women and children by allowing transgender persons to use public accommodation facilities according to their gender identity. Taking off my Senate hat for a moment. As a woman, as a mother of young children, it is grotesque and insulting to me that the demonization of trans people should be perpetuated and excused in my name. As you consider this bill, please remember that we know, without question, from data in our own state and the experience of 17 other states and 225 cities and counties that have gone before us in public accommodations and have experienced no problem, that my children are far more likely to suffer harm should they grow up to have a gender identity different from what they were assigned at birth than they are to experience harm because a transgender person is using a spouse to sell next to them. I urge you, committee members, to support this bill out favorably and on a ballot way. Thanks very much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. First of all, for the record, I'm not trying to insult you or anyone else in any way. And Representative, you had mentioned before that the idea that someone can get up and say that they're a female or a male on a particular day is completely without basis. Well, according to Mitchell Chester, the responsibility for determining a student's gender identity rests with the student. In most situations, determining a student's gender identity is simple. A student who says she is a girl and wishes to be regarded that way throughout the school day and throughout every or almost every other area of her life should be respected and treated like a girl. So too with a student who says he is a boy and wishes to be regarded that way throughout the school day and throughout every or almost every other area of his life. Such a student should be respected and treated like a boy. Those are Mitchell Chester's words, not mine. It would seem to suggest that if someone goes to school on a specific day and feels like saying that, according to Mitchell Chester, that's all he needs to do. Is he wrong?
I would like to read, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to read the definition that exists in our law.
My question was, is he wrong?
So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to read the definition that exists in our law. Gender-related identity may be shown by providing evidence, including but not limited to medical history, care or treatment of the gender-related identity, consistent and uniform assertion of the gender-related identity, or any other evidence that the gender-related identity is sincerely held as part of the person's core identity. And provided, however, that gender-related identities are not to be asserted for any improper purpose.
talked about a transgender person and the rights of privacy that I brought up earlier, that somehow that my argument or discussion about the concerns that parents have reached out to me about is somehow insulting, and I don't want to insult you in any way. But those are the concerns that are being brought to me, the privacy rights of their children. And I think it happens to be a legitimate concern. So the question is, let's assume for discussion purposes, a locker room facility. And in this locker room, as the Attorney General mentioned, people are in there showering. And we have 14 and 15-year-olds for the discussion, girls in there showering. And a transgender person came to school that day and decided the male was a female and entered that bathroom. According to Mitchell Chester, some students may feel uncomfortable with a transgender student using the same sex-segregated restroom, locker room, or changing facility. The discomfort is not a reason to deny access to the transgender student. So my question is, let's reverse it. And let's talk about these young women who do feel uncomfortable with that. What protections are we going to put in place for them?
If I could, before you answer, if you were inclined to do so, I've let quite a bit of applause go on back and forth here. And I understand this is passionate, but it's not entertainment. And the only thing that 15 or 20 seconds of applause does is delay us 15 or 20 seconds more as a practical matter. But what it does in another respect is it has the potential to intimidate somebody who might otherwise want to testify, because are they going to be applauded? Are they going to be booed? What's going to be the next step? So as much as you would like to applaud or yell out something that might be critical of testimony that's being given, I would ask that you please refrain from doing that so we can have an honest and unimpeded hearing here today. Please, thank you. Do you have anything you can respond to?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the first pass at it, and that's all I might want to add. Representative, what I would say respectfully in response to that scenario is there are regions, brands of discomfort that people in general, children, adolescents in particular, might experience and do experience on a daily basis. I would submit that adolescents study discomfort probably. My question for young people, in my capacity as a chairman and education committee chair, I would feel very comfortable having the following conversation with people who brought this concern. If you feel uncomfortable with a transgender classmate of yours sharing a locker room with you, in which you are showering, changing clothes, what have you, more so than you do with any other of your classmates, what particular behavior is it that you are concerned that person might undertake that would violate your privacy? Are we concerned that transgender people out of the group are going to be pulling aside the shower curtain and peeping in, are going to be peeping over the bathroom stall in order to watch their colleagues go to the bathroom? Those are real detailed questions that I think if people are pushing, offering up their discomfort as a reason for abridging the rights of others to a safe environment, that it's incumbent upon us to ask for specifics. And if the answer is yes, I'm afraid that transgender individual is going to pull aside the shower curtain and lessen my privacy rights, that's a behavior that is not permitted. And those are, as the Attorney General said, those are behaviors that are going to be equally enforced, decorum expectations that are going to be equally enforced on anyone in the locker room, regardless of their gender identity, sex, what have you.
I think, quite frankly, you're missing the point. I mean, at least as far as I know, when people go in, there is a distinction. There is a distinction between male and female. And I think it's totally that whether it be males, young men in a bathroom, or young women in a bathroom or in a locker room setting, that the expectation of privacy is there. And what you folks want to do is you want to eliminate those privacy rights that have been in existence forever. And not only that, if you take a look further at what Mitchell Chester, the Commissioner of Education, talks about, he says that what we also want to take a look at is eliminating males and females so that no one feels uncomfortable in these schools. And quite frankly, I'm not prepared to do that yet. I think that this law has some serious privacy rights to the people of the Commonwealth. How many people are we talking about? Do we know, have any statistical data in how many schools throughout the Commonwealth? Before we start eliminating millions of people's rights, can you help me out with how many people we're talking about? And are we talking about people who have transitioned from a female to a male, or from a male to a female? Because it would seem to me that they would be using the male bathrooms and the female bathrooms now. How many people are we talking about? And whose rights are we talking about?
Before we go further down this road, I'd like to point out this is not a hearing on the repeal of the 2011 law that established equal protection for transgender youth in K through 12 legislation. And those regulations from Commissioner Chester have been in effect
The
since
guidelines.
January. Guidance, yes.
This
Okay.
is, the distinction is that, I'm sorry.
Do we not turn this into
Yes, I
discussion,
apologize.
but hearing with some questions and answers? And Representative, your point is well taken, and because we were seeming to be distracted, I was about to mention the fact that the definition, because I don't want this to become blended, Representative, what you are talking about are guidelines that were set up by the Commissioner under the former governor, which are open for revision by the current governor if he wishes to do so, and different in kind and unrelated to the legislation before us today, in which the legislation before us today would simply add public accommodation to the already protected activities of the protected class that we established in 2011, with that protected class being defined in the way in which the leader read it. And I think this reading of it was to try and make that distinction between what we were discussing vis-a-vis the regulations for the Department of Education activity and the legislation itself. So if we can confine ourselves for now to the legislation, there will be plenty of time to discuss what the education folks are doing and may, in fact, choose to do, irrespective of this.
Mr. Chairman, in all due respect, if this law is passed, do you think these would be guidelines or regulations? Do you think there'd be any significant change in these
I
guidelines?
think that will be up to the governor to decide.
According to Mitchell Chester, the reason that they were guidelines.
Representative, I think that what we can do is move forward with legislation if we could.
Thank you very much.
Any further?
Mr. Chairman, I do think it's interesting as you consider and deliberate. It might not be a great idea to set public policy on if there's X number of people that deserve their rights, if there's X plus 100, maybe they deserve a little bit more. I don't think that's a good idea.
Thank you. Any other questions by members of the panel? If not, before you leave the hall or at a later time, you can submit, since many legislators came here to accompany you, and we're kind enough not to take the podium. If, in the interest, and honestly, in the interest of allowing others here to testify, I appreciate all of you seeing time to all the frank comments of your colleagues. If you could just make sure we get the names of everybody who is here with you for the record. Thank you.
And the statement is right.
Very good. Thank you very much. I believe we have Congress Kennedy in the room. Oh,
Thank you, Chairman Fernandez and Chairman Ratzer, and through you to members of the committee. I'm Representative Tori Atkins, and I represent the 14th Middlesex District. I'm also the proud mother of Casey Atkins, to my right, and Bodie Atkins, the last of my fifth grandchild, who is in my arms. He felt it was important to appear today as both his father is transsexual and his brother, who's 2.5, it's his nap time, and he saved you all that anxiety. I am here just to put a personal face to this, because this is my family experience. I applaud both Leader Russian and Representative Provost for their hard work on the legislation. But I wanted to let you know what the actual experience is like in someone's family. My son-in-law and I were teasing at the internet. He said, I can understand why this is uncomfortable for some people. He said, how do you think it was for me most of my life until I came to terms with it? Because I knew from a very young age. But he grew up in an age where there wasn't the internet, there wasn't the discussion on what this was like. And we were teasing about the different, he was wearing green, by the way, the different objections to people over time. And about how I got asked to leave work one day, and I was wearing pants, and that was forbidden in my lifetime, which is silly. So I wanted to give you a personal thing, because I know people have questions, and feel free to ask me. But my daughter has one to say on this subject.
Chairman Rossberger, Chairman Fernandez, members of the committee, my name is Lisa Atkins, and like my mother said, I'm here to just provide a personal insight into this issue and this legislation. My husband Alex and I are a pretty typical suburban family. He's an attorney at a Fortune 500 company. We are very busy and sleep deprived with our 2 children, a 2.5-year-old and 2-month-old Bodie here. But what sets us apart is that Alex is female, male, transgender. When I met him 10 years ago, he was living as a woman. The past 10 years, he has transitioned into the remarkable husband and father he is today. It has been a long journey for both of us, and it has been a remarkable one. It has drawn us closer together, it has deepened our bond and our love for one another. But it hasn't been without challenges. Coming out today as transgender is more difficult sometimes than it is to come out as gay or lesbian. The playbook for it is still in its beginning. We're lucky. We have an incredible community of family and friends who are very supportive. And we also have the resources to be able to ensure that there's a smooth transition. But many folks are not so lucky. And for those people, this particular legislation is very important. Public accommodations are important for all of us, but particularly those who are most vulnerable in our community, bullying and harassment. And those folks are often voiceless in this process. Simple things, mundane activities that you and I can take for granted, like getting a cup of coffee or having dinner with friends, can be loaded with humility and fear for some of these individuals. The Transgender Equal Protections Act that you passed in 2011 provided my family with critical protections, professional employment, and housing. This bill completes the good work that you have done. My husband and I, my family, were incredibly grateful to the legislature for the work that you have done, and it has made a huge difference for our family. Thank you for your time.
Very much.
And my staff is going to provide pictures of the family for those who are here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions, before you go?
ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Brownsberger, Chairman Fernandez, and members of the committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here before you this afternoon. Since its birth, our Commonwealth has held herself up as a gold standard for quality and quality. A city upon a hill, built on a foundation of political will, grassroots courage, that fill American history books to this day. In healthcare, marriage quality, we've fought hard to make good on that legacy in recent years. We have boldly led the way, demanded the rest of the nation at times. In Washington, I've seen how much this leadership, your leadership, matters. How much the rest of the nation expects Massachusetts to be outcome. We are known for pushing our country. So it means something when we do. Which is why I believe that passage of HB 1577 and SB 735 is so critical. Today, transgender citizens are protected from discrimination, public accommodation in 17 states and the District of Columbia. That Massachusetts' name is missing from that list does not go unnoticed. As our congressional delegation fights to fully extend federal anti-discrimination protections for the LGBT community, we need our Commonwealth at our best. The painful consequences of that omission play out every day, something that we've movingly heard from many businesses all around the world. It's those consequences that make this issue personal for all of us, no matter how you identify or who you are. As some of you may know, I'm going to be a dad for the first time in a few years. My wife and I are expecting a baby girl. Like many first-time parents, I try to navigate the fears and uncertainties of impending fatherhood, but telling myself that if I am prepared enough, if I'm involved enough, if I do everything right, I will be able to protect her from fear, from hurt, from loneliness, from rejection. She will never know pain. She will never know suffering. She will never know hurt. I know, of course, that's great. But I also know that most of the parents in this room will tell me that reality doesn't stop from you clinging to that. We can't always keep the people we care about in pain. No matter the force of our will, it has got to work. But we can do everything in our power to ensure that they live in a world that accepts them and embraces them the bright, strong, unique individuals they turn out to be. That is the world that I want for my life. It is all the families sitting next to me today are asking for. The chance to raise their kids, to grow up, to grow old, in a country that promises the same decency and tolerance that so many of us take for granted every day. With that in mind, I urge you to support HB 1577 and ask for such a vote.
Thank you very much. Why don't we withhold any questions if we introduce the rest of the also with you and their speakers. It was probably what's called.
Thank you, Chairperson Brownsberger and members of this committee. My name is Maureen Mulhern, and I live in Arlington, so it's by Congress. I'm here to testify in support of Bill 275 in the Senate and House Bill 377. And I come before you as someone very invested in the rights of transgender people, because I am a proud mother of two transgender sons. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker who has provided counseling to transgender children and adults for the past 15 years in communities from Cape Cod to Cape Ann. I cover a lot together. I'm proudly aware They are refused service. Correct. I'm thrown out of these places each day. For the rest of us walk through these. I know the direct impact of this discrimination in terms of the mental health of these vulnerable citizens. Depression, anxiety, suicidality, post-traumatic stress. They're greatly increased after this encounters. I saw it with both of my sons. It was perfect. I see it every day in the work that I do. Recently, a 15-year-old transgender female that I work with was at a Boston area bowling alley with her family. The manager came over to her, grabbed her by the collar, and pulled her out of the building, saying, "Oh no, not you, not here." Her family quickly left. They had no recourse. There was nothing else they could do. My client was devastated. She rarely leaves the home now except to go to school. She isn't sure she can make it. And I thank her parents for letting me share this heartbreaking story. You can help this young girl and all of our transgender citizens make it. Please vote to protect the lives of these beautiful and vulnerable citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mack?
I don't know all of your names, sorry.
You don't need to.
Thanks for being here. So there has been a lot of talk about young people. Well, I'm one of those young people. So I'm going to tell you this. Every day, I live my life with dreams. I'm scared. I'm scared because of who I am. Imagine that. What would happen to me if someone found out? What would they do? Would they bully me in front of my friends? Or on social media? Would they beat me up? Or would they do worse? I am here today to no longer live my life in fear. I am a 14-year-old transgender teen, and I accept who I am because I refuse to live in fear. I have come here today with my family and friends to loudly and proudly support this work. I know what I've gone through getting here. I had to become a new person. This past Christmas, I finally found the words to express what I had known and felt for years. I am a boy who happens to be born in a girl's body. My family and most of my friends gave me nothing but love and unconditional support. At school, though, it took some time. We had just moved into a new building, and all of a sudden, I have a new name, new pronouns, and I'm asking to use the boys' bathroom. I asked to use the boys' bathroom because that's where I felt safe, because that's who I am. I am a woman. I was told no because of the fact that my anatomy was not male. I was then offered a staff bathroom, and when I used the gender-neutral bathroom, male students would push me and shove me into the wall and call me a freak. Because of this hatred and fear, I chose to avoid the bathroom at school, causing me to drink less water and feel dehydrated and get headaches all day, every day. Honestly, I don't think they knew it was me. While everyone was very nice and very supportive, I was uncomfortable using the girls' bathroom or any bathroom. The school asked me to use restrooms that were segregated from the rest of my classmates. We know from history that separate but equal rights are unconstitutional. Separate but equal makes me feel like a second-class citizen. Working with the school and referencing the Massachusetts education guidelines finally got me to treat people, and I was no longer scared. My friends, though, they were a different story. Some did nothing but make me feel loved, but some bullied me in school and on social media. And one day, I checked my Instagram account, and a former best friend dreamed of waking up with blood on his hands, and he did. That's pretty bad. Worse, others have acted upon these feelings, and we have lost children and friends just for being their authentic selves. Transgender teenagers go through this each and every day, being attacked, losing friends and family, being kicked out onto the streets, them feeling that they have no one and nowhere to go. Many even entering the sex trade to survive in one of their transition process. I'm scared of them. With the help of my town's police department, this harassment is being investigated. I look to you, my representatives, to focus and support in any way you can. Make all kids feel safe and secure. And let them focus on being kids. Kids should be thinking about their first aid or getting their driver's license, not living in fear. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. What's your first name?
Brandon.
And thank you very much for coming forward with some very personal and courageous testimony. And you've done very well.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Jody Cody. I'm a resident of North Reading, a neighbor to Andover, where my grandfather, when I was a child, was elected Democrat of the Year. I am the mother of two amazing children, Jacob and Leah. My daughter is in second grade. She plays tennis, goes to Brownies, and loves animals. She is also transgender. Leah has always been Leah. She just didn't always have the words to tell us. So when I speak about her, I will use her name as female for her even before she socially transitioned. Leah was aware she was male from a very young age, but she always referred to her future self as female. When I grow up, I will be a mother or a wife. We accommodated her where we could, like buying her a Princess backpack or letting her get her haircut with mom instead of dad. For a while, this was enough. We signed her up for a gymnastics class to lie, where she went to preschool. She wanted a leotard, like the girls. She really, really wanted a leotard. There was no accommodation that I knew of for a friend with a boy body to wear a girl's gymnastics leotard. One night, she was crying again about this. Her big brother, who was a wise old kindergartner, decided enough was enough. And he told her the truth as he knew it, the way only a big brother does. We're born a boy, you stay a boy forever. In that moment, my tiny 4-year-old child, she felt stupid. She was inconsolable. She cried herself to sleep in my arms, and I knew this was something real. The next morning, I called our pediatrician, which guided us to this journey. Most like most parents of transgender children, I had no previous knowledge of these things. I cried. I was scared. I got into a fender bender on the way to her first appointment with a therapist who specialized in gender, because I knew once she got there, and they met my child, and that was it. She transitioned right before Easter. My dad was concerned about her attending our Campus Baptist Church in full Easter attire. Our current pastor reference here today. We were all nervous, so I called the pastor of the church at the time, who was an older Irish gentleman, and asked him what he thought. He said to me that she's welcome as she is, just like everyone else. And if anyone has an issue with that, he would take care of it. We are fortunate that our child is not one of the 65% of transgender people who can harassed in a public place. She's strong and confident. She's proud of who she is. Last week, while brushing her hair before bed, she said to me, "Mom, I think it's fine to be transgender." I asked her why she had decided this, and she responded, "I got to choose my own path. It is the right path for me." Passing this bill now ensures she continues to feel this way. I feel like being transgender is one of the best things that has ever happened to me and my family. I am such a better person because of her. Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Chairman Brownsberger, Chairman Fernandez, and members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for allowing me to testify this afternoon. My name is Jeannie Talbot, and I'm from Grafton. I grew up in a little Massachusetts town that most of you probably haven't heard about. It's called Assonet, and it has more trees than people, and still has no traffic lights. I was raised Catholic, and my father is one of 17 children. I I graduated from UMass Amherst, and I've made a successful career in technology marketing. I'm a single mother, and I'm also a Republican. I'd like to take a moment to put a face on the public accommodations legislation we are discussing today. The face of my 14-year-old daughter. Her name is Nicole. However, her birth certificate reads Nicholas Matthew Talbot, male. At the age of 2.5, my child had an obsession with Mulan. Who has an obsession with Mulan? I vividly remember sprinting through the sidewalks of Epcot, my child strapped in a stroller, to find Mulan. When we found her, and yes we did, in China, little Nicholas took Mulan's hand, looked up at her, and began to sing. Who is that girl I see, staring straight back at me? When will my reflection show who I am inside? For the next 12 years, I surrounded myself with experts about gender identity, because it certainly wasn't in the parenting books I had. Many of those experts are right here in Boston, seeking answers to endless questions about how to best parent my child who was born biologically male, but was undeniably a girl. As puberty approached, body dysphoria intensified and anxiety increased. Bullying, drops in self-esteem, school challenges. I knew the statistics. 40 to 50% of transgender youth have suicidal thoughts or attempt suicide. Not on my watch. With the help and support of counselors, doctors, our family, her school, and all of the other transgender families, just like mine, my daughter, Nicole Talbot, socially transitioned this February. Today, I have a thriving, happy daughter, but there is still discrimination at every turn. Today, I am here to pave the way, pave the road for equality for my child and for all other transgender people of all ages who walk beside her and who will follow in her footsteps. As I think back to the song my child sang to Mulan and the power of those words, when will my reflection show who I am inside? I am proud to say that Nicole's reflection is exactly as it is meant to be when she looks in the mirror and when the world looks back at her. I hope that as each of you considers this legislation, that you will remember this face, my daughter's face. My work, our work, is not done until she is protected under the law just as any other daughter, any other 14-year-old girl in the state of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. Sometimes the personal testimony is not sometimes. All the time, personal testimony is much more meaningful than all the experts. Each is joined by Representative Gonzalez and Senator Gillum. Ran out of places that they change tables, but we got a good spot down. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to come down. Senator Chandler, you vote for different legislation, right?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge my total support for Senate 735 and House 1577, the gender identity and non-discrimination bill which occurred in the last half. I'm going to take this a little off track and talk about two other bills. I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 733, an act updating the public health law. It is time for us to take off the books laws that are no longer relevant. All women in Massachusetts have the right to access the full range of sexual and reproductive health care services and make informed, medically sound decisions about their health and well-being. This legislation would repeal 3 archaic, unconstitutional laws restrict access to contraception, abortion, could jeopardize women's health and well-being. First, this legislation would repeal a ban on all abortions, which we have in this state. The Massachusetts abortion ban dating back to the mid-1800s is unconstitutional under both the United States and the Massachusetts Constitution. Repealing this ban would protect women's health by guaranteeing a woman's ability to make private medical decisions about her pregnancy and removing a legal weapon that can be used to prosecute women and doctors. Second, this bill would remove a barrier to abortion access. The state has an unconstitutional requirement that all non-emergency abortions after 12 weeks of pregnancy must be performed in a hospital. There is absolutely no medical justification for this barrier to care, and few hospital facilities actually provide such care. Repealing this requirement would protect women's health by helping to ensure that women continue to have access to abortion services after the 12 weeks of pregnancy. It would not affect the state's ban on abortions after 24 weeks, except in cases of risk to a woman's life or health. And third, this bill will lift the ban on contraception for unmarried couples. Currently, the state has an unconstitutional law that bans unmarried people from using contraception. This law was invalidated inside the U.S. Supreme Court in 1972 in Items Act versus Dare, holding the constitutional right to privacy extends reproductive decisions for unmarried people. At a time when reproductive rights are under attack nationally, Massachusetts must affirm its commitment to protecting women's right to essential health care and expunge these dangerous laws. Keeping these antiquated laws opens the possibility that women could be subject to these unfair laws around the globe. The Commonwealth should be at the forefront of protecting these health issues by ensuring we don't have laws that infringe on women's rights to public health. For all these reasons, I respectfully request to give a favorable support to Senate Bill 733, an act updating the public health laws. I would also like to speak to Senate 734, an act to protect freedom of speech and association. I'm here to talk about it. This is the second session that we have had this opportunity, and we really are dealing with the fact that the federal government has embarked on a project to erect complex and very costly national intelligence infrastructure, expanding its reach to the states by deploying state and local law enforcement officers as surrogates for federal surveillance efforts. In Massachusetts, state, municipal, and even university police have been deputized to pursue new national intelligence. A mission that is far broader and more amorphous than the traditional roles and far more prone to abuse. For example, in Boston, the local data fusion center, the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, BRIC, engaged in extensive spying operations directed against entirely peaceful anti-war protesters, including against veterans for peace. This bill would protect Massachusetts residents from surveillance of their lawful First Amendment activity by prohibiting law enforcement collecting information about individuals' political and religious views, associations, or activities without reasonable suspicion of criminal conduct. I believe action in this area is essential in order to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth from being targeted for domestic tracking or data collection without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This legislation will also create a much-needed oversight mechanism for the sector in the state, ensuring transparency and accountability. For all these reasons, I respectfully request the committee to give a favorable report to Senate Bill 734, an act to protect freedom, speech, and association. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any questions from members? Hearing none, thank you very much. Senator Stoker, do you have Bill, you want to testify on? You would. And then we have two panels on the media shield bill, one Representative Price's panel, and one Pico's right after the minute. Oh, all right. Representative Pico, let's do these for that.
Thank you, Chair Fernandez, Chair Brownsberger, and members of the committee. I'm here today to speak in support of my bill, Senate 903, an act to protect electronic privacy. And in the House, I think Representative Peak is here to also speak in favor of the House. Yes, fine. I have two bills I want to speak to. Last year, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in Wiley versus California that the police cannot search through the cell phone of someone that they arrest without first showing probable cause, and that they must get a search warrant to search through the cell phone records. The court stated notably that modern cell phones, and this is a quote, modern cell phones are not just another technological convenience. The fact that technology now allows an individual to carry huge quantities of personal information in his hands does not make the information any less worthy of the protection of which the founders fought, end quote. The fundamental right to be free from an unreasonable search and seizure was born right here in Massachusetts, and we should be proud of it, in the Declaration of Rights that was later adopted in the U.S. Bill of Rights. These rights are firmly entrenched in our state's history, yet the strong tradition is being contravened by our out-of-date statutes. This bill would take that principle that our electronic data is worthy of protection from government intrusion and apply it more broadly to our everyday lives. The type of information that can currently be obtained where no search warrant is required might include, and it's beyond this, but who you talk to on the phone, when you talk to them, for how long, your phone's precise location and your phone's precise movements, pictures and documents that you store on an internet company's remote server that if it was in a hard file at home, they would need a probable cause and a search warrant, and all of your email older than 180 days. Again, this information would not be available without a search warrant if it was in a physical hard copy form in your home, and should not be available without a search warrant simply because it's in an electronic format. In fact, what we have right now is a very strange, and I would argue ironic and wrong situation. If you are arrested, you enjoy the protections of the Fourth Amendment, and the police cannot have access to your cell phone records unless there's probable cause and a warrant. However, if you are not arrested, the police can access your cell phone records without probable cause and a warrant. This simply makes no sense, and I ask that you report this bill out favorably. In addition, I quickly would like to mention another one of my bills that is before you today, Senate 904, an act to protect Commonwealth's residents from identity theft. As we have seen recently, there's been massive breaches of data that happen on companies that hold some of our most sensitive information. This is a very real and growing problem in the United States and in the Commonwealth. As a state, we do have some laws on the books, but there's a lot of gaps in areas that remain unaddressed. Senate 904 helps fill those gaps and would provide better protection for the residents of our Commonwealth in areas such as additional training for law enforcement, increased victim support, and I can say personally for a family member how difficult that can be, and some new protections in our personal information. So I please ask that you can report that out favorably. And while I'm here, I just want to lend it my voice in support to House 1577 and ask for gender identity and ending discrimination. We should be supporting people like Brandon Adams and the other folks that testified here today and end discrimination. That's a very important bill as well. Thank you.
like examples of how we carry our stuff around these days. I don't know about you, but as somebody who lives 118 miles from the State House, this is my office, or my iPad is my office. Dropbox, photos that I'm saving later to post on social media, or put in brochures or newsletters or whatever it might be. It's all in here. And I'll just kind of sum up with a takeaway. Again, this is in support of the bill that I filed on the House side in House 1531, the Senator's bill was Senate 903. The takeaway from this is so much in the cloud today. And our existing statutes are such a hodgepodge. Case law in the Commonwealth is such a hodgepodge. It's really a mess to try to figure out where we are and what people's Fourth Amendment rights are. What we need are clear procedures and standards, and I believe our legislation sets out those clear procedures and standards. Our laws relative to our Fourth Amendment protections are stuck somewhere in the 1980s. So it was a very good time. I went to law school in the 1980s. If you gave me a minute, I could probably recall the mnemonic that I learned to take the bar exam about what the legal warrantless searches were at the time. The mnemonic was 8 Clam Pie. I can't remember all the letters quite yet. But I won't take your time today trying to remember. But the point is, 8 Clam Pie has probably turned into 8 Clam Pie with ice cream and cake on the side. Because with the age of the internet being sprung upon us, there's so much more information that is stored in a virtual way that warrantless searches can have access to today. A bit of legislative history on this bill. The Senate enacted basically the version of House 1531 last session. We got some on the House side. We had mad rush on the 30th and 31st of July. There were some questions raised by members of the GAs regarding administrative subpoenas and how that statute would be affected. In the House version, including clear language to address those concerns at the latest time. So I feel that the bill is really ready for our time. We had a dress rehearsal last year. Let's put on the full show this year and get it done. I ask for your favorable vote on this and to the second one. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll certainly take seriously this legislation. Any questions from members of the panel? Hearing none, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Representative Reich. And the other panel that's here on the media bill, can come down and sit in the whole panel. First, can you say something? Pause.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here to testify on H1533 and providing against compelled disclosure of certain information by the news media. Before I start that testimony, I do also just want to provide a record as a supporter of the public accommodations. I have with me some real experts on this issue, and rather than take up your time and thank you here today, I would just like to
Excuse us.
We can't hear you at all.
I guess you gotta just bring that microphone a little closer and bring your on. We can right up close to it.
how's that? I can't get any closer. I'll try again.
Go ahead.
I have a panel here with me today, and rather than taking more of your time, I'd like to defer to the panel that are expert in this area. I have with me attorneys John Albano and Robert Bershey, as well as Robert Ambrosio, the executive director of the Massachusetts Newspaper Publishers Association. And I think Mr. Bershey is going to start.
I'm going to start. Good afternoon, Chairman Kennedy, honorable members of the panel. My name is Bob Ambrosio, and I am the executive director of the Mass Newspaper Publishers Association. We represent the newspapers of the state, and I am here this afternoon to convey to you the legislators' strong support for this very important piece of legislation, which will create a journalist shield law in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is one of only 10 states in the country that does not have a statutory shield law on the books. As a matter of fact, just this week, the Republican legislature of Montana enacted an even stronger shield law to strengthen the shield law it already had on the books. My colleagues on this panel are practitioners who deal with this in the trenches all the time. We're going to talk to you a little bit more about the workings of the bill. But the one point I wanted to make about this bill is that this is not a bill to protect journalists and is not a bill to protect confidential sources. This primarily is a bill to protect the public. When confidential sources expose the Watergate break-in, when confidential sources expose the conspiracy in the tobacco industry to hide the health effects of cigarettes, when confidential sources expose the substandard treatment that our veterans are receiving at Walter Reed Medical Hospital, the public who benefited from those matters, and there are countless numbers of situations like this. Confidential sources have protected the public. Massachusetts does not have a clear standard on this in its time that it does, and we respectfully ask that you endorse this piece of legislation. Before I yield, I'm going to be sure I submitted written testimony already on this bill. I was referred to that. I did also want to mention two other bills that we are opposing today. House 1243 would close down public access to investigations of police misconduct. Currently, the law isn't supposed to open to the public. There's an appeals court case saying that those are quintessentially the types of matters that should be open to the public. And so we oppose 1243. And also 1255 is a bill that would close down public access to 911 recordings. Again, right now those are open to the public. Often recordings of the call are extremely important to detailing what happened. In my testimony, I submitted testimony in both of those bills, detail incidents where news reporting has uncovered the recordings of calls that are extremely important for uncovering the background of the story in Massachusetts. So, with that, I ask you to vote against those bills.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my name is John O'Hayo, members of the committee. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today briefly, because, for example, Mr. Ambrosi just listed many positive things that the press has done. If you've worked for the press long enough, then you know that to pretend that the views on the press are uniform or uniformly positive would be probably a bit out of touch with reality. And that's as it should be if the press is doing what it's supposed to do. What I'm really grateful to today is just to be able to try and explain one issue and one reason why I think this bill in this area really is appropriate for legislative study and action. When I started doing this work in 1982, there was a pretty new SJC case that had just come down a couple years earlier involving Walter Roach, who was a reporter for WPZ. And the court ruled against the reporter, but more importantly, at the end of the decision, the court said, talked about developing rules for this area. And the SJC said, to the extent that definite rules were to evolve as limits on the otherwise discretionary balancing of these competing interests, news reporters and sources might be able to base their behavior on better defined expectations, thus encouraging informed expression. That was in 1980. 35 years. There are no more definite rules that have developed. And so what that means as a practical matter is it kind of depends on which session of the court you're in. What the outcome of a battle over sources would be. So, for example, that's true of the appellate court as well. There is a Supreme Judicial Court in Ray Senate in which a reporter wrote an article about disability pension abuses. The pensioner sued the retirement board, not the reporter, The reporter was found in contempt, committed to jail, but only found in contempt not by the Superior Court. The Superior Court said, no, I think they can get this information elsewhere. A single justice of the appeals court found him in contempt. And then it went to the SJC, and the SJC said, you know what? The test here isn't whether the single justice abused its discretion, it's whether the Superior Court abused its discretion, and so it didn't matter who was right or who was wrong, the Superior Court was the right. A few years later, there's another case, ASH versus the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. A default judgment entered against the newspaper. I should admit, it's a loss of money. I don't want to create a doubt on that. Judgment against the newspaper for refusing to disclose the source. Why was the source needed? Not for a claim against the newspaper, for a claim against the hospital for breaching confidentiality. Judgment was entered against the newspaper on a different claim than the plaintiff brought against the newspaper. Here's what happened in that case. $2.3 million default judgment against the newspaper for not disclosing the source. Case proceeded to trial. The jury entered a verdict for the plaintiff against the hospital, even though that source was never identified. Leading one to question whether the source was really needed. Case goes to the SJC. The SJC reverses the verdict and says that claim against the hospital failed as a matter of law. So it never should have been brought in the first place. All of this is just to say that right now, this area of the law, 35 years later, depends entirely on the discretion of the judge who you happen to be in front of. And that's why I think it's an area that really is worth study and action by the legislature. We've seen in just the last few months the outcome of the subpoena of Boston College's Belfast project in pursuit of a prosecution that was dropped by Northern Ireland. This is an area where the press and the public could use the help of the legislature, and I would suggest it's an area that the legislature is really well equipped to provide guidance. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Robert Birchie. I'm a partner at Principal F5 in the law firm here in Boston. I'm here also in support of House Bill 1533, Free Flow of Information Act. It comes in two capacities. One is counsel to the Newspaper and Press Association, and NEDA. NEDA represents more than 450 daily, weekly, and specialty newspapers throughout the area, including more than 230 in Massachusetts. I'm also here as an officer of the New England First Amendment Coalition, which is a broad-based organization of people who believe in the power of transparency in a democratic society. Its members include lawyers, journalists, historians, librarians, and academicians, as well as private citizens and organizations whose core beliefs include the principle of the First Amendment. Now, the bill before you, House Bill number 1533, would solve many of the problems that John Elena just referred to and would provide much needed clarity to the legal standard. It would also protect journalists from the threat of jail time for refusing to out their sources, except in extremely rare cases. Now, speaking for NETLA, many of NETLA's members are small, dailies, or weeklies. My firm happens to run a legal hotline for these groups, and we get a call from them from time to time. If we go forward with this story based on a confidential source, this important story about malfeasance by a selectman, or something along those lines, can I promise that confidential source that their identity will be protected? And I have to say, I don't know. It depends. You know, when a lawyer tells you it depends, that's a time you have to hold on to. federal system is like Massachusetts, and that it has no shield laws, so that may be about to change. Now, in the absence of a federal shield law protecting sources, journalists over the last dozen years have faced a threat of jail terms numerous times. In fact, in 2004, James Tarantino, a veteran television journalist in Rhode Island, was convicted of criminal contempt in federal court for refusing to divulge the source of a videotape showing him aiding the former Mayor Buddy Cianci taking a $1,000 bribe from an informant at City Hall. And that reporter, Jim Tarantino, was sentenced to 6 months home confinement. I'm sure many of you have heard James Rice, the New York Times reporter who covers national security. He had been ordered to testify in an espionage case against the CIA employee who the government believed was his source for material in the book concerning the Clinton-era plans to disrupt Iran's nuclear program. For years, James Rice was facing the possibility of contempt for refusing to comply until Attorney General Holder determined that he would not be called to testify as a discretionary matter. Now, the bill before you is ideal to prevent any of this from happening in Massachusetts, and that's the reason enough to support it. Finally, the bill protects against the compelled disclosure of notes, outtakes, and other non-published information other than the source. On that subject, the bill strikes an appropriate balance between the litigant's need for information on the one hand and the right of the media not to be used as a pressure for information on litigants. The parties subpoenaing unpublished information other than disclosure of the source must show 3 things by clear and convincing evidence in order to get that information. First, they have to show that the information is critical and necessary to the resolution of a significant legal issue before the court. Second, that the information could not be obtained elsewhere. And third, that there is an overriding public interest in disclosure. That standard is similar to the standard imposed in Connecticut in 2006 in its shield law. It's a standard that prevents litigants from subpoenaing newspapers unless it's absolutely necessary. But it also gives litigants ample opportunity to show that they really need to go after the press. So on behalf of NEPA and NEPA, I ask you to give favorable treatment to HB 1553, and I have to Ambrose's comments and express NEPA and NEPA's opposition to House Bill 1255 and House Bill 1233. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other testimony from this committee? Any questions from members of the committee? We'll go right down the line. Thank you. Second floor, Chair.
I've got questions, I guess, for Mr. Brody. Testimony of the opposition for the 911 call, the 911 call legislation. And I think I heard you testify that it blocks public access to 911 calls. But the actual legislation reads that recordings for something is blocked. Transcripts of 911 calls are available. And if there's a finding or a motion made that the recording, the actual audio recording of the 911 call is public interest rises above the privacy concerns of an individual, then it can be relayed publicly made public record. But the transcripts of the 911 calls are presumptively a public record. I guess the question is, what is the, other than prurient interest or sensationalism from the media as to the most sensitive and heightened moments of crisis and despair of an individual calling 911, what is the value of the recording in the media when the public interest can be petitioned to allow that recording to be made?
You're correct. It blocks only the recording, not transcript. And in my testimony, I elaborate a number of cases, some from Massachusetts, some nationally, in which the recording proved crucial to showing what was going on. There are a couple of situations in Massachusetts, for example, in which police dispatchers reporting of a 911 call showed malfeasance by the police dispatcher, and in a way that the transcript wouldn't show. The case out of, I think it was Beverly a couple years ago, in which the police dispatcher actually knew the caller. The caller was, remembering his right, girlfriend or a friend of the police dispatcher, and if you just read the transcript for that call, you would never know
that you had to have that in order to
You didn't have the knowledge of the relationship before you appreciated what the pauses in that call meant. So by petitioning the court with that knowledge, you'd be given access to that call.
I think sometimes what happens is that you don't understand. There's another case on page 5 about 2 years ago, and I don't have a testimony in front of me, but it was a situation where, again, having known about what happened, having read police report of what happened, having read the transcripts of what happened, there's not necessarily no reason to believe that there was anything unseemly going on. This is for my testimony. The Cape Cod Times obtained reporting a 12-minute call involving the choking death of a Mashpee woman, Captain Bill, in 2010. As she lay on the floor choking from a marshmallow, her fiance was pleading with the 911 dispatcher to help. The Cape Cod Times obtained the reporting of that call and found that through the reporting, again, not shown in the transcript, that the dispatcher had violated the county protocol for handling these calls. They're reporting on that. They won them a series of journalism awards for digging into this, but it was not something they would have known in advance without having obtained the audio of that call, listening to the hearing how it was played out. Again, in that case, it was a case where the newspaper had to do a public record request to get the audio, to take over and use the report. This is a situation where we want to hold the people who are taking these calls accountable for their actions. We want to know that our dispatchers and people who are making these calls are doing their job, only by obtaining the recordings of those when we know them.
Very briefly, Representative Bay actually asked about 90% of my question. The remaining 10% is that in 1533, you're trusting the court to balance the public interest and whether it outweighs disclosure or not. In 1255, that same formula is present. It appears as though in 1255, we're not concerned about protecting the source, even though the police may want to encourage people to call, and that person may have a hesitancy if they know that their 911 call will be played on the 11 o'clock news. My question is, we're trusting the court in 1533 to protect the interest of the media. The clause in 1255 also ought to protect it. Why aren't we trusting the court to compel disclosure if you can make the case? It's the same formula from what I can see. I'm having difficulty squaring where if you're trusting the court in 1533 to withhold information of a balancing act. 1255 also has the same thing, but it almost seems like you're disregarding that in favor of unvetted access.
I'm not sure I agree with what you're saying about 1533. I think our point about 1533 is that the courts have not consistently applied the standard, and we're asking the legislature to develop the standard so that we don't have to turn to the courts or at least the courts have a clear standard to apply. And take the same to the court for the 911 calls. I think that there are the exceptions, the exceptions the rule is not available to the public. If there are newspapers reporting sensitive situations, we generally respect privacy of callers. In terms of those newspapers may not reveal any sexual assault. So, protecting the identity, we do that on the other the audio themselves about providing information on both sides of the public interest and what of course the accountability of the agencies that are in charge of the call services and in order to change what transpired in the call.
Going back to the 1533,
at the outset, I'm definitely in favor of the protection for news reporters. What I'm trying to understand a little more clearly is how we define a news entity, what it means to be involved in the news gathering industry. And the example I come up with is something like PATCH, which is an online